I thought it'd be helpful just really quick to sort of bridge the gap here and just start to talk about what are we trying to accomplish here and what is the goal. And obviously, a lot of this work is really coming back to the teacher shortage and really trying to figure out how do we solve vacancies and how do we build the future generation of pipeline. Because today, right, there are just no longer a pool of 20-year-olds in colleges, in ed prep programs, able to staff our schools. Full stop. That's a little scary, given that that's what we've relied on for decades now. And so I think a lot of the sort of conversations we're having across the field are, what does that future generation look like? And how do we build that? And in particular, are there ways to build really towards, right, this sort of community investment, right, sort of mechanism of paras, subs, folks who live and already work in our districts? And what does it look like? We know many of those folks actually would really like to be actual fully certified teachers, but often feel like they can't today because of cost and because of time. And certainly the fact that there's a bunch of new apprenticeship funding and sort of ways to help fund some of these programs is interesting as a subsidy in terms of cost. But we're really finding time actually tends to be one of the biggest barriers, because most of our candidates in these sort of potential programs or in our para sort of workforce, they're adults, right? They have families at home, they have a second job sometimes. And so trying to understand how do we meet adult learners where they are and actually sort of build the sort of degree that they need to be able to access it and be able to sort of get through it. That's a big shift in the world that we live in today. And yet, if we can use that, if we can create these sorts of systems, we have all sorts of interesting potential to not only start to solve the shortage and really think about the sort of the numbers of candidates in our existing classified staff and pool really being able to actually solve our vacancies outright. But because most of these candidates sort of tend to live within our communities, right, in the general para population, paras often live within 12 miles of the high school they graduated from, and their kids go to the high school, go to the schools that they're working in. And so it's a much stickier, but also a much more diverse population that actually matches our student demographics really well. And because we can build these in sort of on-the-job ways, it's a really interesting way to think about improving the quality of the profession. And then obviously, if there's new funding to pay for these things, right now, the same funding that has gone towards plumbers and IT technicians and right, sort of the apprenticeship vocational trades in the past decades, those funds can now be used to actually pay for and subsidize teacher degrees. And so it's a really interesting sort of shift in terms of how to sort of support and manage that. And then ultimately, I think what we're trying to help manage is bring higher ed to the table in that sense, to really be able to think about, if we're going to meet an adult learner where he or she is today, how do we do that when, our traditional models are very much sort of in person, sit and get, and we just haven't seen, right? We need to be able to move that away from sort of time-based, right, sort of delivery of coursework. And we're now being able to do that into job-based delivery of coursework. And that's a pretty interesting and profound change that higher ed is really starting to move on. And we're seeing this in healthcare, and we're seeing this in lots of other industries where it's really the idea of what ways can we use actual portfolios and artifacts of real instruction, and how do we use those portfolios to confer the same 3-credit course that I'm sure many of us on the call, on the sort of Zoom today, had in very theory-based, reflection papers and sort of theoretical analysis. And so that's really the big shift that we're sort of talking through here. And ultimately, from the BloomBoard side, again, our lens is trying to help both sort of build that new version of an LMS for our higher ed partners, and then really integrate that into our school district partners and really figure out how can we create a really sort of embedded, almost like a 2-year residency program that's really about taking a candidate through an associate to a bachelor's degree entirely on the job during their 7:30 to 3:30 workday, and embedding that in the actual work that they're doing.